Well, welcome. Could we start out by having you identify yourself and tell us when you were the religious education director?
This is an easy first question. I am Julie Miller, and I was Director of Religious Education from 2014 to the spring of 2018.
And when you started, did you have any particular objective or purpose or program in mind? What was day one like for you?
The butterflies were free day one. Even though I had worked with kids for over 40 years, this was brand new territory. And just to share a little background, in about 1995 or 6, I was principal of a school on the west side of Salt Lake City with a high percentage of minorities, poverty, impacted by a lot of refugee issues. Serbia, Croatia, that war was at its height, and the International Relief Committee relocated a number of families to our area. At the same time, the First Unitarian Church, under Tom's leadership, was looking for a new social justice project. And so, out of the blue, I don't remember who, perhaps Tom, called one day and said, "May we come talk to you?" And they did. And that conversation led to 2 or 3 others with more members of the church who came and basically interviewed me and several other teachers to see if there was merit for the long term for a big project. And apparently they liked us. And our opinion on our end was it was a match made in heaven. And so from that, the church helped strengthen our volunteer program. They rebuilt our library. One of the members of the church, Andrea Globokar, came and said, we need a working strategic plan from the school to the church because this is a mutual commitment and it's a big commitment on our part. So it was something as educators, we were used to mission statements and vision statements and all that falderall, but Andrea came and said, we are going to sit down and work through many facets of what needs to happen as we rebuild this school. And she stayed with us. And not only did she help develop, but she trained us, which I think is wonderful, because then we all gain new skills. So that really was the genesis of the beginnings of refugee outreach for the First Unitarian Church. And from that, the work continued with a number of people, same stalwarts, many of them today on that committee, who helped get our families settled, who brought furniture, who brought hope, who brought friendship, who made us aware of issues in their homes that we might not be privy to in a school setting, if there were any safety issues or they needed something, or we became aware. So it was just a very nice synergistic relationship between the two entities.
You mentioned that you had, at the time that you joined the church as religious education director, mm-hmm. some 40 plus years of experience in education. Perhaps you could give us some detail about that.
I started my career in a tough suburb outside of Detroit, and worked in special education with severe and profoundly handicapped kids. That was in 1970-71, and worked later for Michigan State University training teachers because a law came into effect. I jokingly, lovingly called it the womb to tomb law, but it took all the young men and women and children out of state institutions and put them back in public schools. And it was an eye-opener for many of us because it's one thing to train at a university level, it's another to be right where things are happening. So I spent 7 years there and then transitioned to a university level, then left Michigan, moved to Kansas, and worked at the time what was known as the Topeka Association for Retarded Citizens. Spent several years there and then worked in a middle school with emotionally disturbed youth. And then we moved again. We left there. I was only there 2.5 years. and we moved to Salt Lake City. That was in 1978, and the rest, they say, is history. I spent time there working in special ed classrooms, several years at Shriners Hospital, working there basically in what was a one-room schoolhouse. Left that position and decided to go back to school. And at that point, I had spent approximately 20 years in the classroom, and then went back, got a scholarship for a doctoral program at the University of Utah. Went to the University of Utah. I actually ended up leaving that program at my father's death, took a break, and then was offered a Danforth scholarship at Brigham Young University. And all I remember is I had to have an interview with a bishop, and he said, "You look like a nice lady." I passed through the gate, got my degree, and then spent another 24 years working as an administrator for Salt Lake School District.
So you arrived at the Unitarian Church in about 2014.
In 2014, Tom knew I was retiring from the school district. He reached out to me and said, "Would you like to interview?" And actually, it was another member of the Unitarian Church, a colleague of mine whom I knew as an administrator, who happened to also be a member of the church. We talked, and Tom called me, and he said, "I think you have a lot of skills." I said, "Tom, I just gave away my dresses. I don't own a Bible, and I don't go to church." He said, "Great, you're our gal, come interview." So I thought, with that vote of confidence, in I came. There was a full committee. To this day, I don't know how many people they interviewed, but the committee selected me. I was very grateful at the time. The religious education assistant was Nancy Mose. And Nancy had experience with the previous director. And she basically held my hand through the first year, along with loving members of the community. And it was quite an experience. But the butterflies were free. It's one thing to teach on terra firma, things that I knew well, but then I had to absorb the culture of the church, the goals that Tom and other members of the board of directors felt needed to be in place. There'd been a little bit of upheaval with the previous director when she left. So I think everybody just wanted to calm the waters. And Tom's main goal, oddly enough, my recollection is I want the kids to be curious and want to come to church. I want to draw them in. I want to retain membership. I want to grow families. And I want those kids to feel joy. So bring the arts in, which he knew I could do. Bring in the passion, the rest will come.
What sort of programs did you bring in specifically in the arts?
Well, we started rotations. I thought maybe a full year of religious education, regardless of how good a curriculum may be in place for the kids. All kids love art and expression. I knew kids to be highly creative in this church. They're very independent. They like seeking their own way. So I thought maybe just the joy of art for art's sake initially, and we'll see where this goes. So we basically created semesters in the year where we'd have a half year of religious education curricula, and then 6 months bringing in artists. And we tried to have themes. It could be around faith and action and things we took up to do in the community, or art that expressed things that we could do, sell to the community during the art fair or other things to raise money for social justice projects the kids wanted to engage in. So then it became trimesters. I think I have left the church this year in that position. Amanda Asco is now in that position, and to my knowledge, she is carrying that on. And the kids, I think, looked forward to it. Not all of these kids, it was obvious, had training in arts backgrounds. And you know what they say, sometimes getting kids on the same page doing the same thing is like herding cats. But these kids did coalesce. And always one of the goals when I came in was to build a sense of community. All of the kids, regardless of whether they were toddlers through high school, needed safe space. They needed to feel that was their home. They needed reasons beyond just curricula and arts to come. And for lack of a better way of saying it, building a very strong sense of community, which is something I think First Unitarian Church takes great pride in.
The Christmas pageant is one of the major events of the year in the Unitarian Church, where kids get to show what they know and show what they can do. You had involvement with what, one or two Christmas pageants? Three Christmas pageants.
Three pageants.
What do you recall best about those events?
Chaos, in a word. No, they were, initially the first year it was scripted. There was a play. I followed it. My predecessor left me a rotation of plays they had used over time. One of the parishioners I'll never forget in the church, one of the congregants came up and said, "Julie, we have seen these things 3 times now. It's time to retire them. We need new ideas, new blood." So the second year, instead of following a script, we created one, and we hired an artist to work with us. And we sort of piloted what is known as a pop-up pageant, which they had done in other churches in other places in the United States. And it went pretty well, and Lissa Lander narrated that year. The third year, actually it was the third year we tried the pop-up pageant. Year 2, we still created a script and had a more traditional play. But the congregation got behind the pop-up pageant, and the whole idea was to engage the kids, let there be some spontaneity, which there was, and let the congregation participate. Because that was one of my other goals, was to find ways to have intergenerational relationships that could be built with the youngest children through the young adults. And the community was fairly well connected to the young adults, in their faith formation in the church, but not so much with the young ones. And it was my experience, the same very dedicated members of our church volunteered to teach in classrooms. And so I thought, we've got to expand that. And of course, Tom, over that whole 3 years, and I'm sure continuing now with the board, we need to grow. We need to get new families. That's the lifeblood of the church. And so many churches across the country, Unitarian churches, are losing their youth. And so the whole idea was to capture their imagination, build community, build relationships and friendships and safe spaces for these kids, anchor them to their history and their heritage, which was important, have vital curricula, which a lot of our curricula I think is now outdated, and I think Amanda Esco and Lissa Lander are working very hard to revitalize curricula. We knew we wanted to anchor families, and well before my time, some church members started family fun nights on the first Monday of the month. Absolutely wonderful. One of the best things, in my opinion, that happened to religious education, because it drew in, especially the families with younger kids, into the church. What better way to get together than share a communal meal, have a speaker or some entertainment. I kept the kids going in the classrooms upstairs with art or some engaging project. The kids seemed to like it. And so those were wonderful experiences.
One of the most important moving parts of a religious education program is its teachers. And in the case of First Unitarian Church, those would all be volunteer teachers. Tell us a little bit about finding and retaining teachers for the RE program.
I'm sure it's growing. Initially, it was a little difficult because it is a huge time commitment to show up on Sundays, whether it's a 9-week block with a break and then come back, or it was for a full year. But that is one of the things that I heard from volunteer teachers. We don't mind teaching, but we don't like being anchored to a classroom all year necessarily. It is a big commitment, and we miss going to church ourselves. So the arts did help solve that, because the artists came in, and then it gave classroom teachers a break to go back into the congregation for that approximately 9-week period. And then they came back refreshed. Teaching is not easy. I don't care if it's in a classroom in a school or it's at church Sunday morning. Teaching is teaching, and you have to be organized. People needed to be prepared. They needed to be ready for special needs kids, which is always difficult if you don't have background in that area. And I laughed. I remember saying to Tom, I think every Unitarian church in the country must have its own fingerprints. They're all different. And all the members of the church seem to me to have their take on what Unitarianism means. And that's one of the glories and beauties of this church. So you want to foster that individualism with the kids too. But sometimes that individualism can go to the side of being renegades, and then it's hard to corral that terrific energy back. When you're just a layperson trying to do your very best to impart curricula, keep their attention, keep them focused, keep them working together as a team, having your deliverables, if you will, your curricula, mean something so that they take it from the church classroom home with them and experience it out in the community with their families and their day-to-day lives. Is it useful in school? Is it useful as they interact with other friends? That always was one of my goals too.
Thank you.
You're welcome. This has been a joy. It has. Thank you.